Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. This is Chris Lloyd. Just to let you know, we're going to just give it a second to people. And so we'll kick it off here. Hello and welcome to using Azure Cognitive Services for user profile synchronizations. When you say it out loud, that's a bit wordy, so I'm not sure how the SEO is going to work on that later. But my name is Chris Lloyd, and I am the Chief Technical Officer for Oxford Computer Group in the United States. And I'm joined today by Jordan Stelzl, who is a senior consultant, but a more accurate title for him would be an identity wizard. On a regular basis, Jordan is in the field with organizations solving for their identity challenges, and he is a Swiss Army knife of identity knowledge, and I am very grateful for his assistance on today's webinar.
Thank you.
And yes, hi, Jordan. In today's webinar, we'll be showing off some of our work that we've done at some of our clients that wanted to enhance the complicated user profile photo in Active Directory and Office 365. But before we start, when we talk about these user profiles, I wanted to give you a quick background on who we are for those who don't already know us. Oxford Computer Group has been an identity consultancy since Microsoft bought its first identity company in 2003, which was called Zoomit. And ever since then, we've been engaged in identity and security projects in and around the Microsoft landscape. As an organization, we're starting to see identity have a more impactful role on end user experiences, and profile photos is just one aspect of that experience. If there are any questions, please go ahead and ask them in the question section of the chat. We'll be answering them at the end of the presentation. And with that, let's get started. So as an organization, we've adopted Microsoft Teams like many other organizations out there. And every morning I open up my Teams and I see my coworkers' faces via their profile photo. With profile photos, I have a deeper connection with the members on my team. This runs deeper than just the pictures within the given application. My subconscious will remember the interactions I've had with this person because I have a picture to associate to that person. Profile photos also enable an organization to celebrate its diversity and culture. As a personal example, last week we had a few new hires and my connection to them is stronger due to the relationship I've made between their profile picture and their voice. This is also the reason why video calling features so prominently in Microsoft Teams. So ideas and relationships are enhanced when technology fades into the background and it feels like a natural conversation. So as with a lot of our webinars, I'm going to be doing a poll here to see, let me get the poll section open there, to see how do you manage your profile photos in your environment today. And so I'll launch the poll. Appreciate if you give us an answer. Also be really interested to know we were having trouble coming up with what that other scenario might be. But we'll take the first two answers, which are most likely. All right, got some responses there. For those that are interested, the majority are letting the users manage it themselves. So to talk about how the photos flow in Office 365, I'd like to pass the baton off to Jordan so he can walk us through it.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. So we're going to start here talking about the photos journey in Office 365. So in this scenario, we have a thumbnail photo or a photo that is being stored in Active Directory on the user object. And in a lot of companies, this can be used also by other applications. If you have like an on-prem SharePoint, or you have even like a ServiceNow that's in its AD import, it's pulling in the photo. So there's definitely many options there to utilize that thumbnail photo in AD. But what's going to happen here first is that you have this Azure AD Connect that's synchronizing users up to Azure AD. So it's going to pull in that photo. And then Azure AD Connect is going to take that thumbnail photo and it's going to export it out to Azure AD so that it's on the user object in Azure AD. The next step here is that if a photo has not already been uploaded into Exchange Online, then the Exchange Online will import that photo from Azure AD and use that as, the initial photo that it has. And an important part of this is that this only happens once. So this only happens when that initial photo goes up and Exchange Online doesn't have a photo, then it's going to pull it from Azure AD. If you were to go back and update the photo in Active Directory and that got synced to Azure AD, Exchange Online is not going to go pull that photo again. So it's really a one-time thing. And then the next step is that there's a periodic sync that is happening between Exchange Online and SharePoint Online and other Office 365 applications. And so in our tenant environment, we saw this was pretty immediate, but we only had around 300 or 400 users in our test environment. If this is a larger production environment, it may take some more time for that synchronization to happen. And so that's something that's happening on the back end. We don't really have visibility into that, but you'll have to just kind of test and see how that works in your environment. So after that, users are able to go into Exchange Online or into SharePoint Online or Delve, and they're able to update their photos with a more high resolution photo than the one that would have been coming from Active Directory. And so a lot of organizations are, allow their users to go into Exchange Online or SharePoint Online and update their photo. And also administrators are able to do an update to the Exchange Online photo, either through the Exchange Online PowerShell or through the Microsoft Graph. So for photo locations, this is where we're talking about where these photos are being stored and some of the limitations and things around that. So Active Directory, we have this thumbnail photo attribute, 100 KB maximum size, and then the photo dimensions that are recommended are 48 or 96 by 96. And then Azure AD follows the same logic as Active Directory. But then when you get down to the Microsoft Graph photo, which includes Exchange Online, SharePoint, Delve, there's a 4 megabyte maximum for that. So you can put a much better high resolution photo in there. And then the photo dimensions that you see are actually what's created by the Graph or Exchange Online when you upload it. So if you upload a photo that is greater than 648 or 648 by 648, Exchange Online or Azure AD in the background is actually taking that photo and making all these different sizes that you see here, and those are used in different parts of Office 365.
Cool, thanks, Jordan.
Yep.
In our company's consulting history, we've done many photo synchronization projects, but they've been historically limited to sending the photo to Active Directory, where it would be consumed by applications like Exchange and SharePoint. As we've seen through the photo journey to the cloud, Office 365 kind of flips that on its head. And with the release of and until the release of Microsoft Graph, we really didn't have a great mechanism to accomplish the process that we're trying to solve for today. But like any project at OCG, we basically went about it and we created some high-level requirements. Some were set by the organization wanting the solution, and then others were basically things that we thought we could add to it to enhance the process using some of the latest technologies. So some of the requirements that we have here, we want to crop the photo. So a lot of photos are actually taken at a horizontal landscape, and as you saw from our photo requirements, we want a square photo. So we actually want to crop that photo, but we want to do it intelligently. And I'm going to go into that in further detail on some later slides. And then we wanted to synchronize the photos from Workday to AD and Office 365. Now, we chose this method, and this actually we didn't choose this. One of our clients and a couple clients wanted to do it in this manner. So they wanted to have the users go into Workday, upload their profile photo, and then have that matriculate through the environment. We could do this in reverse. You could fundamentally, with our solution, we could flip the entire thing around and say users update their photos in Office 365. We'll retrieve them, we'll send them to AD, and then we'll send them to Workday. So whichever direction works for your organization really wouldn't matter for our solution. And then the preventing the users from changing their photo in Office 365 is very specific to the Workday downstream solution here. Because we want Workday to be authoritative, we don't want to have different photos in Workday versus Office 365. So we had to have a way to detect the changed photo in Office 365 so that we could revert it back to the Workday photo. We also had to use some of the exchange features to prevent users from changing the photo in different places. And then we wanted to detect when a photo is changed in Office 365 and overwrite it. So that kind of ties into that previous one. We have to prevent it, but there are some scenarios where users can slip into an interface and change that photo that we can't stop them from doing. So we actually have to do some detection work to see when that photo is changed. And so cropping photos may sound like a trivial thing to anyone who's used a simple photo editing software, but how do you accomplish this in an automated approach so that you can process thousands of photos in an automated fashion? You could just take a guess and start at the upper right-hand corner, crop the photo to the right size or the size that you wanted, but we wanted to actually take a smarter approach and save us development time in the process. And that's where Azure Cognitive Services comes in. And Azure Cognitive Services offers machine learning and artificial intelligence through a simple API. And there are 5 different service offerings that Azure Cognitive Services has, but we're only really going to be focusing on one for our solution, which is the computer vision service. And this can be a little confusing when you talk to people that are familiar or have a base understanding of what's in the Azure platform, because Azure also contains a product called Azure Machine Learning. But the easy way to keep them separated is Cognitive Services is for developers without machine learning experience, and Azure Machine Learning is really tailored for data scientists who are basically going to work with their own data models and things of that nature. So as an example of what this service is capable of, Microsoft actually provides a web page, and you'll see it in the lower left there, where you can upload a photo and it will actually have the service analyze the image and output the results to you. And so this is Monster, and he is a cat. On the right is the output from the API, and it has identified him as a cat, as you can see within the list there. He's also a carnivore, and he's laying down. As we all know, a cat at rest will tend to remain at rest unless acted upon by some outside force. Usually I'm moving too fast for them. What's important to our solution is the purple box there. It's also represented inside of the objects array where we have the X and Y positions. That box actually is the identification from the computer vision service of the region of interest of the photo. This is what we want to crop for the profile photo. And so what if the service went a step further and it did the cropping for us? Wouldn't that be pretty cool? Well, it actually does. Our solution uploads the photo to the computer vision service, and it determines the region of interest, crops the photo to the region of interest, and then it actually resizes it for us to the size that we specify. This is all accomplished on a single API transaction. And so at the bottom there, I've got basically a link to the API that we're using there, which is basically generating thumbnails. Very simple API to use. You basically, here's the photo, here's the dimensions I want, and I want to do the smart cropping, which is obtained from the data that we saw in the previous slide. So some examples of this, obviously another cat. I seem to have a plethora of those lying around my house. But we've basically been able, this is exactly from the service here. And it's identified that the cat is the region of interest, and it's cropped it accordingly. So, and if you look at that photo, it's not like they just basically took from the upper left-hand corner and cropped it down. They're actually really doing some intelligent work here to find this cat to be in the center of the photo. And here's a photo of myself. Just as some inside baseball knowledge, all of my photos that I use for my profile photo are always me eating a sandwich in various locations around the world. But again, it smart, intelligently cropped it. It knew me and my sandwich was the area of interest here. it cropped those two people on the far left out of the photo, and now I have a profile photo ready for me to use. And so to further explain our solution, I'm going to pass it back to Jordan, who's going to run through a high-level diagram of the solution.
Awesome. I love the sandwich photos. Love them. So here is the solution that we had put in place for one of our clients. And so what we're starting with here is that we have this connection to Workday, and we're importing the photos from Workday. And so in our scenario, we're actually making the call to get the photos and import them. In a different scenario, you may be able to get your HCM or HR system to, drop these photos out to a file share. But in our case, we're actually making the calls, and we're detecting the changes when we make these calls. And how we're doing that is we're looking at a hash of the photo that we're storing on our file server, and we're looking at the photo that we're actually getting from Workday, and we're just comparing them. And so that's important because every time we see an updated photo, we're going to want to make a call out to the computer vision service that you see here and get a 96 by 96 and 648 by 648 photo regenerated. And there's a small cost that Chris will cover on that later, but we just want to make sure we're not, every single time we're syncing or doing the solution, we're not, making this call for, 7,000 photos or something. So we really wanted to make sure that we're capturing those deltas. So when a photo change service is detected, we're making that call to the computer vision, then we're bringing that into our IDM platform, and we're using our IDM platform essentially just to sync to Active Directory and out to the Microsoft Graph. And so our IDM platform is going to see the change of the photo, and it's going to export that photo, the 96 by 96 version, out to Active Directory. And then that's going to go into Azure Active Directory through the Azure AD Connect that we talked about earlier. And then we are taking the 648 by 648 photo, and we are exporting that out through the graph to Exchange Online, Azure Active Directory. And the graph is taking that photo, and it's creating all of those smaller photos that we had talked about earlier, and making sure that that gets updated in Exchange Online, making sure Azure AD matches, and then eventually that synchronization between Exchange Online and SharePoint Online and Delve happens in the background, and those photos get put over there. So next slide. So some of the challenges that we ran into with this solution, and specifically working with the Microsoft Graph, and I'll back up a little bit because we did mention that you can do this through the Exchange Online PowerShell. So there is a set user photo command in Exchange Online, but the performance that we experienced for doing this was not great using that PowerShell. So it was around like 4 photos a minute, possibly, and so there's some limitations there. There's other limitations you can read about. So the graph is really meant to be really fast, and the graph has a method for doing this. So that's really the way we went. But we'll talk about the challenges here for the graph. So with the Microsoft Graph, it does not include the ability to do a delta when a user photo is updated. So that what that means is when you're making a call to synchronize or import users from the graph, you're able to make a delta call. And that delta will happen when a user attribute essentially has been updated. So the photo is not included in that. So if someone goes and updates their photo in Exchange Online, for instance, and I do a delta from the graph, I'm not going to see that user on my delta report because it doesn't trigger that. So what we had to do is we had to just kind of put into a nightly or even during the weekend, do some type of full sync where we're just doing a full import of all the Microsoft Graph users and their photos and doing a check to make sure that their photos haven't been updated. And then another tricky part of this was that when you export a photo out to the Microsoft Graph, it actually does change the file hash of that photo. So it makes some type of slight change to the photo, And of course, when you start comparing those file hashes, then they don't match. And
Yeah,
so what we ended up, yep,
our best guess is because they're doing all those resizing operations that Jordan
right,
alluded to earlier. So that's our best guess. We don't actually know the answer to that, but that's the best guess we have.
right, yep. Yeah, and so what we're doing to get over that is once we successfully make that call where we're exporting the photo out to the graph, then we turn around and we make another call just to get that photo back right away, which has been edited, and we're storing that file hash then for comparison. So we know that, you know, this new file hash is actually the same as the photo that we had exported. And so then for files that are larger than 4 megabytes, and this is referring to the Azure Cognitive Services. When we hit a image size that's larger than 4 megabytes, we can't use that Azure Cognitive Services. So that's a current limitation there. And so what we do is we actually use a fallback method where we're just resizing the photo. So we're not getting necessarily the smart cropping features of Azure Cognitive Services, but we're just using a PowerShell module essentially that will resize the photo to like a 96 by 96 or 648 by 648. And 4 megabytes is pretty large, but in our scenario, we were using Workday, and Workday actually allows you to put in a photo up to 10 megabytes. So that's a pretty large photo, but they do allow that. And we also ran into a few issues where, you know, we had like a photo that's been scanned on a PDF, you know, so we're getting that data, and of course that doesn't work. So in those scenarios, you know, the user has to really go back to Workday and update a photo that is like a JPEG or a different format that's supported. And then one of the other challenges with the graph is that we're not able to delete the photo through the Microsoft Graph. We're only able to replace it. So this might not be that big of an issue. You know, mostly if we have a photo and we write that out there, and then normally a user is going and uploading a new photo, and then we're writing it back out. So in this scenario, though, if the user were to delete their photo from Workday and they wanted it deleted automatically from Exchange Online, we're not able to do that through the graph. That would have to be something manually done.
We could have
Either
a default photo, so we could detect that scenario and then have basically the standard blank user photo that we could upload in that place if that was a requirement.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. And then another caveat here is that users must be licensed for Exchange Online before that photo can be added. So before we can actually use the Microsoft Graph to export that photo, that user has to have an Exchange Online mailbox and have that license. All right, Chris, back to you.
All right, and we mentioned one of the requirements was preventing the user from changing their photo in Office 365. It's not 100% achievable. Really, there's just the exchange policy that exists, which is a PowerShell command to set the mailbox policy to restrict the user from being able to change their photo, and then the redirection that when somebody goes and enters into that basic workflow there to redirect them to the place that you want their photo to be managed. Not 100% because there's several different avenues that we've seen and discovered, and some that we didn't know about that you can actually get through to change your photo, which is why in our scenario here, retrieving those photos and making it to see when they change so that we can set them back is so important. And then the all-important cost. So anytime we're using a cloud service that's used on a consumption basis based upon transactions, we have to be cognizant of what that might cost. Luckily, though, it's fairly cheap because we're looking at it's basically $1 per 1,000 transactions. So if we were to look at a scenario with 15,000 users, the initial sync would take $30 because we would be doing technically every photo twice. We would be doing one call to get the 96 by 96 for Active Directory, and then the larger resolution for Office 365. After that, it's really just going to depend on how often users change their photos or new users are onboarded with new photos. But it's probably going to be pretty low. And in our testing, we saw minimal usage, so it's very cheap to implement. This is not really an expensive solution on an ongoing basis. And that's it. I didn't see any questions pop up in the chat, but that's really all we have. I did have one other poll, and that's, would you like to hear more about this solution? All right, but I appreciate everybody for taking the time, and it was a pleasure speaking with you today. And thank you to Jordan.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It was great speaking with you all today.